What happens when justice fails and an innocent man is left to fade away in the harshest of prisons? He loses all hope, believing he is invisible to the world. But he was not invisible to everyone. He was seen by a creature with a heart so loyal, it would defy orders and risk everything to uncover a devastating secret. This is the story of that incredible bond. By liking, sharing, and subscribing, you help us bring more tales of courage and connection like this to the world. And now, the story of a man named Ethan and the German shepherd who saved his life. The Arizona sun was a merciless warden, beating down on the high concrete walls of the state penitentiary and baking the very air the men breathed. For Ethan, the heat was just another layer of his suffering. At 22, he was a ghost haunting the corridors of his own life, a thin frame draped in a faded prison uniform, with eyes that had lost their youthful light. He had been a college student with a part-time job, his world full of books and quiet dreams, until a night of wrong place, wrong time accusations had shattered it all. Now, his reality was the clang of steel doors, the scent of antiseptic and despair, and the constant, gnawing fear. In this place, weakness was a scent, and Ethan bled it from every pore. He moved with his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement, trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. But his quiet nature and slender build made him a natural target. He was a sheep thrown into a den of wolves, and the wolves were always hungry. Among the figures of authority who patrolled the bleak landscape of the prison yard, one stood out not for her cruelty, but for her impenetrable coldness. Officer Sarah Miller was a woman carved from granite, with sharp features and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to tug at the corners of her dispassionate eyes. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, her demeanor unwavering. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was as crisp and barren as the desert wind. But she was never truly alone. At her side, moving with a silent, fluid grace, was Koda. He was a magnificent 5-year-old German shepherd, his thick coat a classic tapestry of black and rich tan. Koda was not just a dog. He was an extension of Sarah's will, a living embodiment of control and power. His intelligent, amber eyes missed nothing. He walked with the disciplined focus of a seasoned officer, yet beneath the training lay the untamed spirit of a fiercely loyal protector. He was a constant presence on Sarah's patrols, his powerful form a clear deterrent to the chaos that simmered just below the surface of prison life. Ethan had seen them many times, a fleeting image of order in his world of turmoil. He never looked directly at Officer Miller, but his eyes would sometimes drift to the dog, marveling at his proud bearing and calm intensity. Koda was everything Ethan was not: strong, confident, and feared. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday, behind the mess hall where the shadows clung to the walls like moss. Ethan was simply trying to get back to his cell block when a large inmate named Marcus, a man with a thick neck and cruel, piggy eyes, stepped into his path. Two of Marcus's friends fanned out, blocking any escape. "Look what we have here, boys," Marcus sneered, his voice a low rumble. "The little lost bird. You look pale, Ethan. Maybe you need some help getting your color back." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He said nothing, his throat tight with terror. He knew what was coming. It had happened before. A shove sent him stumbling back against the rough brick wall. The impact jarred his teeth. "Nothing to say?" Marcus stepped closer, his shadow engulfing Ethan completely. "That's okay. We'll do the talking." The first punch caught Ethan in the stomach, forcing the air from his lungs in a silent gasp. He doubled over, and a hand grabbed his hair, yanking his head up. Pain exploded on his cheek as a fist connected with his face. He tasted the metallic tang of blood. Despair washed over him, cold and absolute. He was trapped. There was no way out. But then a new sound cut through the haze of pain and fear. It wasn't a human voice or the clang of a gate. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Marcus and his friends froze. They turned to see Koda standing 20 feet away. His body coiled like a spring. He was no longer the calm, disciplined patrol dog. His ears were flat against his skull. His lips curled back to reveal a formidable set of white teeth. A deep, menacing rumble issued from his chest, a sound of pure, primal warning. He hadn't barked, he hadn't lunged, but the threat was unmistakable. For the first time, Ethan saw fear in Marcus's eyes. The bully's bravado evaporated instantly. He and his friends exchanged nervous glances. Then slowly, they backed away, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender. They scurried away like rats, disappearing around the corner. Ethan slid down the wall, his body trembling uncontrollably. He sat on the hot ground, tasting blood and tears, his head bowed. He heard the soft padding of paws on the concrete. He braced himself, expecting a bark or a nudge from the intimidating animal. Instead, there was only silence. He risked a glance upward. Koda stood a few feet away, watching him. The aggression was gone. The growl had subsided. Now, there was only a steady, focused gaze. In the dog's dark, intelligent eyes, Ethan saw something he hadn't seen in months. An acknowledgement. A connection. It felt as if the dog saw past the prison uniform and the fear, right into the core of his wrongful suffering. Officer Miller's sharp voice broke the spell. "On your feet! Prisoner!" She stood beside Koda, her expression as impassive as ever. But as Ethan struggled to stand, his bruised body aching, he saw her gaze flicker from him to her dog, and for a split second, a look of puzzlement crossed her face. Koda had acted on his own, a breach of their rigid protocol. As he was escorted away, Ethan couldn't stop himself from looking back one last time. Koda was still watching him, a silent guardian in the unforgiving glare of the Arizona sun. The pain in his body was immense, but for the first time, in a long, long time, a tiny, impossible spark of hope flickered within Ethan's soul. He wasn't entirely alone. In the days that followed the attack, a subtle shift occurred in the prison's cruel ecosystem. The bruises on Ethan's face faded, but the memory of Koda's intervention did not. Wordlessly, a new boundary had been drawn around him. Inmates who once saw him as easy prey now kept their distance. Marcus and his cronies would avert their eyes whenever he passed, their fear of the German shepherd far outweighing their contempt for Ethan. This newfound space was not born of respect, but of a borrowed power, and Ethan was acutely aware of its source. Koda's interest in him was no longer a secret. During their daily patrols, Officer Miller would stride down the long corridors with her usual rigid purpose. But Koda's path would invariably curve towards any area where Ethan was present. If Ethan was in the laundry, Koda would linger by the door, his head cocked as if listening to the rhythm of the machines. If Ethan was in the yard, Koda's watchful gaze would follow him from across the dusty expanse. It was a quiet, constant surveillance, but it felt nothing like the predatory watch of the other prisoners. It felt protective. Koda seemed to have an innate sense for Ethan's fragile state, a canine intuition that perceived the anxiety simmering beneath his quiet exterior. This silent guardianship soon evolved into something more tangible. One afternoon, Ethan was unjustly blamed for a disruption in the dining hall and was confined to his cell without his evening meal. Hunger was a familiar ache, but this time it was coupled with a stinging sense of injustice that left him feeling hollowed out. Hours later, as darkness settled over the prison and a profound quiet fell upon the cell block, he heard a faint scratching at his door. He sat up on his cot, his heart skipping a beat. A black nose appeared in the narrow food slot at the bottom of the steel door. It was Koda. The dog nudged a small, cloth-wrapped bundle through the opening before pulling back. Puzzled, Ethan crept to the door and picked it up. The cloth was still warm. Unwrapping it, he found a thick piece of cornbread and 2 slices of roasted chicken, clearly pilfered from the prison kitchen. Ethan stared at the offering, his vision blurring. In this place where kindness was a foreign currency, a dog had shown him more compassion than any human had in months. He ate the food slowly, savoring each bite as an act of defiance against the despair that surrounded him. From her station at the end of the hall, Sarah Miller saw it all. She had noticed Koda's growing fixation on the young inmate. It was an anomaly, a deviation from the strict training and discipline she had instilled in him since he was a pup. She logged the incidents, her reports clinical and detached, but a flicker of curiosity had taken root beneath her professional veneer. She watched the silent exchanges, the way Koda's posture would soften slightly when Ethan was near, and the way the boy seemed to draw a sliver of strength from the dog's presence. She kept her distance, observing, waiting. This was not in the training manual. The bond between them was truly forged one night in the deepest hour of darkness. Sleep rarely offered Ethan an escape. More often, it was a portal to the past. He was trapped in a nightmare, reliving the night his life had been stolen. The flashing lights, the confusing shouts, the cold click of handcuffs, and the gavel's final, damning slam echoed in his mind. He began to toss and turn on his thin mattress, small, desperate whimpers escaping his lips, sounds of a soul in torment that were too quiet to alert any human guard. But Koda heard. He was on a late-night patrol with Sarah, his paws silent on the polished concrete floor. His ears twitched, catching the faint frequency of distress. He stopped abruptly, pulling gently but insistently on the leash, his body angled towards Ethan's cell. Sarah gave a soft tug, assuming he'd caught the scent of some contraband, but Koda held his ground, whining softly, his gaze locked on the steel door. He pressed his powerful body against the cold metal, a low, concerned sound rumbling in his chest. Then, he pushed his wet nose into the food slot, stretching as far as he could. Inside the dark cell, Ethan surfaced from his terror, his body slick with sweat. He felt something brush against the hand that dangled off the edge of his cot. He flinched, his first instinct to pull away in fear. But then, the touch came again, gentle and warm. A wet tongue delicately licked his fingers. The shock of it was like a jolt of electricity. It was Koda. The nightmare's terrifying images shattered, replaced by this single, impossible act of tenderness. The gesture was so profound, so full of a comfort he thought he would never feel again, that it broke through the dam of his tightly controlled emotions. Silent tears streamed down his face. Tears not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. He pressed his hand against the cold steel of the door, feeling the comforting presence of his friend on the other side. The horrors of the night faded, replaced by the warmth of a bond that defied logic, a beacon of light in his suffocating darkness. The quiet understanding between Ethan and Koda became a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of prison life. The nightmare incident had woven an invisible thread between them, a bond of shared vulnerability and profound trust. Ethan found himself anticipating the rhythmic patting of Koda's paws during patrols, each glance from the dog's intelligent eyes, a reassurance that he was not entirely forgotten by the world. This fragile peace, however, was about to be shattered. One morning, the routine of the cell block was broken by a surprise inspection. Officer Sarah Miller stood at Ethan's door, accompanied by a burly, older guard named Officer Peterson, and with them, in full working harness, was Koda. His demeanor was all business, his senses on high alert for any hidden contraband. He swept the small cell with practiced efficiency, his nose skimming over the thin mattress, the metal toilet, and the sparse shelf. He found nothing. But as he approached the back wall, a section of old, crumbling brick that had been crudely patched with plaster, his behavior changed. He stopped, his body going rigid. A low whine escaped his throat. a sound of confusion rather than aggression. He pressed his nose against the wall, sniffing intently along a crack near the floor. Then he began to scratch at the plaster, his claws making soft scraping sounds against the stone. "Koda, heel," Sarah commanded, her voice sharp. The dog glanced back at her, his amber eyes wide with an unusual intensity, before turning back to the wall, more insistent this time. Officer Peterson grunted. "Probably just a mouse in the wall, Miller. Let's move on." Sarah frowned. This was not the trained alert for narcotics or a weapon. This was something else, something deeply instinctual and agitated that she had never seen in him before. She pulled firmly on his lead. "Koda, enough." Reluctantly, Koda obeyed. But even as they moved to the next cell, he kept looking back at Ethan's wall, a silent question hanging in the air. The incident left Sarah with a nagging sense of curiosity. A few days later, Ethan was assigned to a work detail, clearing weeds from a desolate strip of land that ran along the prison's outer wall. It was the same wall that formed the back of his cell. Under the hazy afternoon sun, he saw Sarah and Koda patrolling the perimeter fence. For a brief moment, Sarah was called away by another officer to deal with a minor issue. She put Koda in a sit-stay, expecting him to remain. But Koda's loyalty to Ethan now rivaled his discipline. He watched Sarah walk away, then turned his head and trotted silently across the dry grass to Ethan. A rare, genuine smile touched Ethan's lips. He dropped to his knees, his hands automatically finding the thick fur behind Koda's ears. For a precious minute, he wasn't a prisoner. He was just a young man sharing a moment with a friend. Suddenly, Koda pulled away. He returned to the base of the wall, to the exact spot on the outside that corresponded with the area he had been so fixated on inside the cell. He began to dig, not playfully, but with a focused determination, his powerful front paws sending dirt and loose gravel flying. Ethan watched, puzzled. "What is it, boy? What did you find?" Koda's paws struck something with a dull metallic clink. He nudged it with his wet nose, pushing a small dirt-caked object towards Ethan's hand. Ethan picked it up, rubbing the grime away with his thumb. His breath caught in his throat. It was a keychain, a tarnished, rectangular piece of metal with the faded logo of a local business, Chen's Auto Repair, barely visible. It was old and scratched, but Ethan recognized it instantly. A cold dread washed over him, so intense it made him dizzy. The world seemed to fall away, and he was back in the courtroom, watching the key witness on the stand. His name was David Chen, a nervous mechanic who swore he saw Ethan near the scene of the crime. Ethan remembered every detail about him, including the way he nervously fiddled with a silver keychain that dangled from the car keys in his hand. This keychain, he had told the court it was his lucky charm. According to the official reports, all of Mr. Chen's personal effects had been catalogued and returned to him after he gave his statement. The keychain should have been in his pocket, miles away from this prison. It should not, under any logical or possible circumstance, be buried in the dirt at the base of Ethan's cell wall. Its presence here was an impossibility. It was a fragment of a forgotten truth, a secret that had been buried along with Ethan's freedom. Clutching the cold metal in his palm, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. This was not just a piece of junk. It was a clue. It was a mistake made by those who had put him here. And as he heard Officer Miller's voice calling for Koda in the distance, a new, terrifying feeling bloomed in his chest. The dangerous weight of hope. The cold weight of the keychain in Ethan's pocket felt heavier than any shackle. He heard Officer Miller's voice getting closer, sharp and clear. Panic seized him. With trembling fingers, he scrambled to his feet just as Sarah and Koda rounded the corner of the building. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, immediately registered his flushed face and furtive movements. Koda trotted ahead and nudged Ethan's hand, whining softly as if to ask if he was all right. What was that? Sarah's tone was clipped, all professional suspicion. What did you find? Empty your pockets, inmate. Ethan's heart sank. He had no choice. Slowly, he pulled out the grimy keychain and let it fall into his open palm. Sarah's eyes narrowed. To her, it was contraband. Another broken rule. Another reason to distrust. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched to confiscate it. But then something extraordinary happened. Koda, who had been watching the exchange intently, moved with fluid speed. He didn't growl or show teeth, but he deliberately placed his body between Sarah and Ethan, blocking her path. He looked up at his handler, letting out a low, pleading whine, his gaze shifting from Sarah's face to the keychain in Ethan's hand, then back again. It was a stunning act of defiance. He was not just protecting Ethan, he was protecting the secret the keychain held. Sarah froze, her hand hovering in midair. She stared at her dog, bewildered. For 5 years, Koda had been her partner, his obedience absolute. Now, he was standing guard for a prisoner over a worthless piece of metal. The dog's unwavering insistence, his desperate appeal, broke through her wall of professional skepticism. Koda's instincts were legendary. And right now, every instinct he possessed was telling her that this keychain was more than contraband. It was important. She looked at Ethan's terrified, hopeful face, and for the first time, she truly believed something was terribly wrong. "Give it to me," she said, her voice softer now, less an order than a request. Ethan hesitated, then placed the keychain in her hand. Sarah pocketed it without another word. "Get back to your cell block. Don't speak of this to anyone." That night, the prison's oppressive silence felt different to Sarah. In the sterile quiet of her small office, she placed the keychain under the glow of her desk lamp. The faded logo of Chen's Auto Repair seemed to mock her. She pulled up Ethan's case file on her computer, the official narrative of his guilt laid out in cold, black and white text. She scrolled to the witness list. The name leaped off the screen. David Chen. A chill traced its way down her spine. She spent hours cross-referencing dates, guard schedules, and maintenance logs from the time of Ethan's trial. She discovered gaping holes and strange inconsistencies. Logbooks for entire shifts were missing. Most tellingly, there were maintenance requests for the old, condemned solitary wing, Block C, a section of the prison that was supposedly sealed off and unused. Pressure began to mount from unexpected places. Warden Davies, a man with a politician's smile and cold eyes, stopped by her office. "Heard you were digging into the old Bishop case, Miller," he said, his tone casual. "It's a closed book. We should all let the past stay buried." The friendly advice felt like a direct threat, confirming her fears and hardening her resolve. Frustrated and hitting dead ends, Sarah knew she was missing a piece of the puzzle. The next day, she took Koda, not on patrol, but back to the wall behind Ethan's cell. "Show me, Koda," she whispered, unleashing him. "Show me what I'm missing." The dog immediately bypassed the spot where he had dug up the keychain. He paced along the wall, his nose to the ground, until he stopped and began sniffing intently at a single loose brick about 3 feet up. He pawed at it gently, then looked back at Sarah, whining with that same urgent insistence as before. Using her multi-tool, Sarah worked the brick free. Tucked inside the dark cavity behind it was a small, tightly folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile with age. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. The pencil writing was frantic and barely legible. "They won't let me leave. He said they'd hurt my family. Help me. They are keeping me in Block C." It was not signed. Sarah stared at the note, the horrifying truth crashing down on her. David Chen. The keychain was his link to the outside world, dropped during a moment of desperation. He wasn't a witness who went home after his testimony. He was a prisoner himself, held illegally within the prison walls, coerced into delivering the testimony that had condemned an innocent man. The keychain was not just a clue. It was proof of a conspiracy. A secret kept within the prison itself. A secret someone, likely the warden, would do anything to keep buried. Clutching the fragile, damning note, Sarah Miller knew the world had irrevocably shifted. The prison walls, once symbols of order, now represented a conspiracy she had to dismantle from within. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. Warden Davies's veiled threat had made it clear she was on her own. Her only true ally was the magnificent German shepherd who sat patiently at her feet, his intelligent eyes watching her as if he understood the gravity of the moment. He was the key to it all. Acting with a speed and secrecy honed by years of discipline, Sarah bypassed the internal chain of command. She made a call to a trusted contact in the state's Department of Justice, a woman she knew to be incorruptible. She laid out the facts coldly and clearly. The inmate, the keychain, the dog's insistence, the note, the condemned cell block. The danger was palpable. She felt the warden's eyes on her during her shifts, and she was certain her office had been discreetly searched. She and Koda were in a race against those who would bury the truth forever. When the investigators arrived, they came unannounced, sweeping into the facility with quiet, undeniable authority. At Sarah's insistence, Koda led the way to the derelict Block C. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. Koda, however, moved with purpose, his nose to the ground, leading the team through the dark corridor until he stopped at one specific cell. He scratched at the door, whining softly. Inside, forensic teams found microscopic traces of fabric and faint scratches on the floorboards, evidence of a desperate, illegal imprisonment that corroborated the story held by the keychain and the note. The fallout was swift and decisive. Warden Davies was quietly removed from his position, and the conspiracy he had orchestrated to secure a high-profile conviction unraveled. For Ethan, locked away from the turmoil, the first sign that his life was about to change came when two state officials, not prison guards, came to his cell. They didn't speak until they were inside the former warden's office. Ethan Bishop, a woman with kind eyes, said gently, "There has been a serious miscarriage of justice. The evidence used to convict you was fabricated. You are a free man." The words didn't register at first. They were a language he no longer understood. Freedom. He stared at the officials, his mind a blank, until the full weight of it washed over him. He sagged into the chair, the years of despair finally cracking, and he wept. An hour later, he walked towards the main gates of the penitentiary. The final, heavy steel door slid open with a groan, and Ethan stepped out into the brilliant, blinding light of the Arizona sun. He blinked, the warmth on his skin feeling foreign and overwhelming. Standing by a plain car was Sarah Miller, her stern uniform replaced by simple civilian clothes. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, but before she could speak, a black and tan streak of lightning shot past her. Koda, freed from his leash, sprinted across the pavement. He didn't bark or jump playfully. He ran with a deep, singular purpose, his powerful body closing the distance in seconds. He came to a halt directly in front of Ethan, reared up, and placed his giant paws gently on Ethan's chest. Ethan stumbled back, his hands coming up to grip the dog's shoulders. He looked down into Koda's face. The dog's amber eyes were soft, shining with a look of profound love, pride, and recognition. It was a look that said, "I knew it. I knew you were good. We did it." In that moment, the last of the prison's chill left Ethan's bones. He wrapped his arms around the magnificent animal, burying his face in the thick fur of Koda's neck, and hugged his savior, his friend. They stood there for a long time, the man and the dog silhouetted against the stark walls of the prison they had conquered together. Sarah watched them, her own eyes glistening. A little while later, the three of them stood together on a small rise overlooking the highway. The penitentiary, a grim monument in the distance. The sky above was a vast, cloudless blue. Ethan's life had been shattered and then painstakingly pieced back together, all because of the unwavering loyalty of a four-legged friend and the courage of a woman who chose to believe him. Koda leaned against Ethan's leg, a symbol of hope and justice, a living testament to the truth that even in the deepest darkness, a faithful heart can light the way to freedom. Sometimes the most profound truths are not spoken in words, but are communicated through a trusting gaze and a loyalty that knows no barriers. Koda's story is a powerful reminder of this beautiful, silent language that connects us to the animal kingdom. If these are the stories that touch your heart, we hope you will join our community. Please subscribe to Voice of Paws to continue celebrating the incredible bonds that inspire us all.